for coming out on a beautiful afternoon. I'm Robin Calloway, president of FANS, and there's a couple of exciting things happening that I want to share with you. One is back when we got the Make a Difference Award, BLM made these lovely magnets that go on your refrigerator or whatever. We still have some left, so they're on the table. You can spend that $1,000 John gave you and buy one. So FANS is an all-volunteer organization. We started in 2012, so it's been a long time ago. And we've really got the 80-20 rule going. How many of you know what that means, and how can you apply it to organizations that you work in? Somebody tell me, what's the 80-20 rule?
20 people should do 80% of the work.
Exactly. 20% of the people do 80% of the work. And that's true in every organization. But we've got some 20% who are getting pretty burned out. FANS finally is going to actually hire some help. This is why we've been saving our pennies, and you have to have the stars line up. So thanks to Eric and Jeff, you know, that constellation party, we got the stars aligned. But we also got a grant from Conservation Lands Foundation. So what we're doing is we're contracting with Trish Navon. Trish, where did you go? There we go, right there.
Yes.
Do you want to make a speech, Trish? Yeah, okay. She's going to be helping with some of the administrative tasks. So things like helping us to coordinate communications, our Little Green Light database, our Eventbrite. And that's going to free up some of other folks who are getting a little burned out to do programming and really focus on our mission. For example, I mentioned before, we're going to be doing a campaign called Respect, Connect, Protect, targeting youth on public lands. So that's where I'd really like to spend a lot of time. So I'm hoping that'll do that. So there you go, and stay tuned for more exciting updates. So our program for next month has changed. It's now about plastics, not plastic surgery, just plastics. It's called Where Does Our Plastic Go? A Sea Adventure to the Great Pacific Gyre. I think that's how you pronounce it, right? And the reason that we care about that here is all the plastics that we're using, they're going into our system, they're going down the drains, they're going out to the Pacific Ocean. And so this is going to be a really interesting program, and that will be on Saturday, November 18th from 4 to 6. And Douglas has already signed up.
Who's going to be our speaker?
Oh, the speaker, I was saying it was Willie Nelson, it's Willie Kunkel. And he's a researcher, sailor, and adventurer. And so he actually goes out on the research vessels and collects this garbage. They got 103 tons of plastic that they picked up out of the North Pacific Ocean. And that set a world record for a single ocean cleanup. So he's going to bring all that here. You're going to sit really close together.
The plastic?
Yeah. Okay. So any questions or comments so far? And if not, we'll go into our program for today. Okay. So our speaker, Jamie Bowles, has worked for Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife for 9 years. She started as a fisheries intern, and now she's a wildlife biologist in the Deschutes watershed, which includes the Dalles, Bend, and Prineville districts. How many acres is that?
Oh gosh, it's a lot, but it's all or part of 9 counties.
Okay. Nine counties, yeah. She's worked with forest carnivore species, and I'm just going to let her take it from here. Oh, the other exciting thing, thank you to Terry and Ann Light, and they figured out our wonderful technology in this room now, so you won't have to look around stuff and the screen won't fall over, and we're feeling pretty cool today.
We are.
Very cool.
Oh,
Okay,
wow.
very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that great introduction. Can you guys hear me okay? I apologize, I don't own my own microphone. I can hold my hand here if that would help anybody imagine that I have one. If you at any time can't really hear me, just like give me a holler with your hand and I'll try to enunciate a little more. I seem to be a little constrained by cords over here. Hopefully I won't trip over them at some point in time.
Jamie, if we tried to move that towards the middle more, are we're gonna have to shut everything down to do that?
I think this is as far as I can go.
Yeah, it is at this point. So with our HDMI, it's a little bit short. How about if I run your PowerPoint for you?
Yeah,
Would that
absolutely.
be okay? And then you can stand in front?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
fine. We can
Great idea.
do that.
You just look at me
Yeah.
and I will know it's time to go.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for having me out here today. This project is very near and dear to my heart. So I love pretty much all wildlife. It doesn't matter what it is. I love it. But this was my graduate research project when I was a technician, just starting with the agency. It was kind of my baby for quite a few years, and I love talking about it. I love the foxes. I'm sure maybe at least one of you in the room has seen a fox here in Central Oregon, and they're just pretty darn cool. So I appreciate you guys having me out to tell you a little bit more about our project. So, like she said, I'm Jamie Bowles, and I'm the regional habitat biologist for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I was a total non-traditional student. I'm almost 40, I grew up here in Central Oregon. I used to work in the medical industry, and when the economy tanked, I went back to school. I got a great severance, and I was like, I'm gonna go back to school and do something I wanna do. At that point in time, I had 3 kids. And I have 4 kids now, but decided, I really want to go and do something I love. My dad told me you're going to spend more time at work than you are going to spend with your kids and your family and doing fun things. So you might as well love what you do. And I have to say, I absolutely love what I do. I get to talk to a wide variety of people. I've held a lot of different positions with the agency. Many of you, I'm sure, heard Aaron Bott speak a couple weeks ago. And I used to be in that position before Aaron came to us from Utah. He's fantastic, isn't he? Yeah, so just a little bit about our project. So I'm going to talk to you guys a bit about montane red foxes because they're different than like a typical red fox. Other Sierra Nevada red fox studies that have gone on, mostly outside of our state, our fox study, and what we now know about the foxes and kind of where we go from here. So just a little bit about montane red foxes. They are smaller than the average red fox. You can hit it just one more time. The males are about 9.3 pounds and the females are about 7.3 pounds. I don't know about you guys, but my cat is way fatter than that. A typical red fox, and when I say a typical red fox, I would say like an eastern red fox, which is an introduced fox species. They're a little larger. They're about 11 pounds for males and 9.5 pounds for females. I will tell you these foxes and all foxes, they're mostly fluff. Like they are just fluffy. But these guys are little. Montane red foxes come in 3 different pelages, so 3 different coat varieties. Did you have a question or are you just rushing? Okay. 3 different coat colors. And so like this one right here that's on the screen is a cross fox. And if you were to take that fox's coat off and stretch it out like this, along the back you're going to see a black stripe across his shoulders and a black stripe down the back. And that's what it looks like, kind of a tawny sides. And then just like any other species, like these coat colors can vary a little bit, which I'll show here in some of these other photos. This is another cross. This is a little kid. Isn't it just about the cutest little fella ever? Typically these foxes, usually the crosses and the silvers, which I'm going to show you a picture here in a little bit, have like a little white marking on their chest. Not always, or sometimes they'll have like a little white tick on their toes. All of these red foxes, no matter what subspecies they are, have a white tip on the tail. So if you see a white tip on the tail, it's a fox. This one is also a cross. This is fox number 14. He was captured up at Elk Lake. He's still up there. His collar failed. They have a drop-off link on the collars that I first started using, and this one apparently didn't want to drop off. It's supposed to drop off after a year, and the poor fella has had it on for quite a few years now. They don't bother them. This collar weighs less than an orange, so I mean it's not a lot of weight for them to carry around, and he's still running around up there. This one is a red. Wow. So when you guys see a red fox, typically what you would see is like what's on my fabulous dress here. A very, very orange fox with some dark black legs and obviously that white tip on the tail. The foxes that we see up in the mountains are usually more of a tawny, like a blondish, reddish blondish color. This is fox number 10. I caught him and fox number 11 on the same day, 2 for 1. We celebrated with pizza that day. That was pretty exciting. It was pouring rain. But that's a red, believe it or not, even though it looks like a blondie. This is also a red, so this is a lower elevation fox. So I'll talk about this a little bit more, going into my presentation here. But these foxes, again, another montane subspecies of red fox, the lower elevation foxes that we have here that we found out through genetics via this study are that these are more closely related to the Rocky Mountain red fox, which is also a montane subspecies of red fox. That's typically found in the Rocky Mountains and in northeast Oregon in the Wallowas and the Blue Mountains, but can't put wildlife in a box. They just kind of pop up wherever they feel like it. So that's fox number 15, and that came from the Smith Rock area. And then this fox was up in the Three Sisters Wilderness. This is a photographer, Nancy Burke, that reached out to me and had taken some really beautiful photos. This is a silver, otherwise known as a black. Has anyone heard of like a silver fox? Anyone refer to a fox as a silver fox? It's a red fox. It just happens to be a silver pelage. So they used to call them silver foxes, but they really truly are a red fox. It's just a different coat color. So sometimes people will call them silvers, sometimes people will call them black. And again, there's a variation in that pelage color. It could be jet black, usually with that little adorable white marking, or more like this, or even those guard hairs on the back, especially as they get older, can become white and along their muzzle too. So they're just beautiful. This is a special adaptation for these montane red foxes. So they have entirely fur-covered toe pads. And just like a lynx, those covered toe pads allow them to move swiftly across the snowpack, typically in search of prey or away from predators. And foxes with their long tails can help them, move along pretty quickly. But that is darn covered in fur. So that's pretty neat to see. The foxes in the lower elevations, like the Rocky Mountain red foxes, they are also still fur covered, but not quite as much as this. And it was also winter time when we captured this fox, so it had full winter coat on, including extra furry snowshoes. So just a bit more about, did you have a question?
Yeah. Do they shed?
Oh yeah, yeah, they definitely shed, and their hair is surprisingly long.
Do they blow their coat once a year or twice?
Oh, I'll have some pictures in the further on in the presentation, but yeah, they do shed once a year.
Okay, thanks.
So there are 3 different subspecies of montane red foxes. There's the Cascade red fox, which is found in Washington. So that is historically what we believed we had here in Oregon. It appears that the Columbia River is likely the break for that. Not to say that they can't hop on a bridge and cross the road, but that appears to be the break for those 2 different subspecies between the Sierra Nevada red fox and the Cascade red fox. So they're actually doing quite a bit of work on the Cascade red fox up in Washington. They've got same kind of studies as we've been doing. They've got a lot of scat research going on. They've got some hair snare studies. And then they've also been trying to do some collar capture. And they'd actually reached out to me and they're like, can you come help us trap foxes? And I was like, I wish I could, because it would be really fun. So during this study, we collected a whole lot of genetic material. And actually this study started after we discovered that what we had here locally was the Sierra Nevada red fox. So in 2015, our fur bearer coordinator, Tim Hiller, who owns the Wildlife Ecology Institute now, who is a co-author on this study, he did a lot of those hair snares. And for those of you that aren't familiar with what a hair snare is, imagine a belt around a tree at about fox height. And above that, they're gonna nail in, let's say like a deer leg or something, some sort of roadkill or something that we've come across. And there's gonna be a belt around the tree, and sticking out from that belt all around it are little rifle bore cleaners, multi-use tool. They're wiry and they easily pull out hair. So if any of you guys hunt or have rifles that you've had to clean, if you get it stuck in your hair, it's not great. However, for grabbing genetic material, it's fantastic because it pulls the hair out completely, and you need that little follicle to send it in for genetics. So he did that study. They sent in the genetic material to UC Davis in California, and it came back, whoa, hold the press, we've got Sierra Nevada red fox in Oregon. And so they've been doing work in California for quite a long time, basically since the late 80s. In the early 90s into the early 2000s, they really ramped up a lot of their work. There's a whole lot of fingers in the pot in California. I mean, everybody wants to work with foxes in California, so there's been a lot of work done. We can move on to the Sierra Nevada. Oh, I'll talk about the Rocky Mountains, sorry about that. Yeah, so as I had mentioned, we're lucky here in Central Oregon because we have not 1, but 2 of these montane red fox subspecies, and that's the Sierra Nevada red fox and the Rocky Mountain red fox. So if any of you have seen a fox in Redmond or in Terrebonne or probably in Bend, it's likely that it's more closely related to the Rocky Mountain red fox. And I say more closely related because there is genetic admixture. So some of you that maybe have been here for a while know that there were fur farms in Central Oregon in the recent past. And when that became not popular anymore, a lot of those people just released the foxes. Well, obviously they're gonna breed with the native foxes in the area. And it's also possible that some of that Rocky Mountain genetics could have came from those captured foxes that were in the area. So if you were to look at the genetic results that I get back, you're gonna get like this little pie chart. Well, actually it's more than that, and I'm not a geneticist, it's quite jumbled. But it'll show you percentages, and the ones that are down here in the lower elevation areas, imagine the Rocky Mountain red fox portion of the pie is fairly large, and then it'll be like a little sliver of, like eastern red or other red fox. We, as managers for the department, we consider all red foxes to be red foxes, and that's the way that we manage them. We do not manage them on a subspecies level. So that's what we have here in the lower elevation areas. There are Rocky Mountain red foxes up in Northeast Oregon. There's actually quite a few. And they've been coming down into the lower elevation areas in about the last decade. And there's been some talk of if California was wanting foxes, would it be appropriate that instead of sending them our genetically pure Sierra Nevada red foxes down to California, could we possibly, because we have so many other of the Rocky Mountain red foxes, send some of those? I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a little bit. There's the big mountains, and that's us. Okay, so the Sierra Nevada red fox, that is what we have here up in the mountains, and typically we see them at about 6,500 feet and above would be their average elevation, and that's kind of across like California and Oregon. We've seen them as low as about 3,600 feet in some areas, and then all the way up, heading toward the top of South Sister. Obviously they're not really living on top of South Sister, there's not a lot up there. But these montane red foxes, and that's the Cascade red fox, the Rocky Mountain red fox, and the Sierra Nevada red fox, they're what we would call habitat specialists. So they live in areas that have certain habitat, and these foxes live in like that white bark pine, subalpine, alpine environment. So like really, really high elevation. However, foxes innately are pretty plastic in their ability to live in different habitats. And the foxes up in the mountains have a very similar diet to the foxes down here in the low elevation areas. So picture a grouse in the mountains, very tasty critter, very similar to my chickens. So, it's very, very similar diets. They eat yellow-bellied marmots, both in the high elevation and low elevation areas. So if you have marmots and you want to get rid of them, you definitely need a fox, because they love them. They'll eat the whole thing except for the head. And then, they do eat pica, so that's one conservation strategy species eating another conservation strategy species, but they do like those. They like pica. Lots of little rodents, which we see in high and low elevation areas. And they're also omnivores, so they do eat fruits, they do eat vegetables. Up in the mountains, we see them eating those delicious Oregon strawberries, the huckleberries, the blueberries that we have. They also love hamburgers at Mount Bachelor. Do not feed the foxes. So that's just kind of a little overview of montane red foxes. So a little bit more about the Sierra Nevada red fox, and you can just click through until you get to the bottom of this little bit of a wordy slide, and I apologize, I know the text is small, I will read it to you. So literature currently describes that the Sierra Nevada red fox subspecies is in the most precipitous decline of the 3 subspecies of red foxes. It was petitioned to be listed on the Federal Endangered Species list in 2011, and it was found to be warranted but was precluded due to higher priorities. So then it was let me back up. In 2011, it was found to be not warranted due to lack of credible biological information. It was petitioned again in 2015 and found to be warranted, but then was precluded, meaning it was side-tabled due to higher priorities. Because as you can imagine, you know, at the rate that subspecies and species of every variety are going extinct, they have to come up with a priority list. So we are what's part of the Southern Cascades DPS, and a DPS is a distinct population segment, which if you follow anything about endangered species may have heard about that before, what a DPS is. And so the Southern Cascades DPS is the Cascades of Oregon down into the Cascades of California, so the northern mountains of California. So that's all the Southern Cascades DPS, that's where our foxes are part of. And then there's another population in the Sierra Nevadas of California. They are listed. They're listed federally and they're listed in the state of California. Our population is not listed. Why is that they're not listed? We're not worried about our fox population. We have quite a few foxes in the mountains. California, they banned a lot of trapping. Well, they banned all trapping. They don't trap in California. And here in the state of Oregon, trapping is really expensive, right? And not a lot of people do it anymore. It's just kind of fell to the wayside. And the people that do trap, they're typically trapping coyotes, or they're trapping bobcats, because bobcat fur still has quite a good market, especially for those bobcats that are really white on the underside, because some clothing manufacturers still use those for like the collaring or like on different clothing items. But like, for example, on a good year, a bobcat pelt could go for say $1,000. On a good year, a fox pelt could go for $20. So you're getting in your truck and you're running trap line. We have regulations. You got to check these traps, you know, every 48 hours. It's a lot of fuel. It's a lot of time. And foxes have really, really thin hides, as you can imagine. I mean, look at that fox. I mean, they're smaller than your house cat. They're super skinny. They don't have thick hides like a dog. And so trappers, when they go to tan the hides, the hair actually slips off. And so it's useless. It's not a great fur to use for the market anymore. There was a market for it in the past. So nobody's targeting foxes anymore. So we're not worried about it. I understand that a lot of people, you know, like don't like trapping, and that's fine. You know, we're all entitled to our own opinions. I do have to say that trappers were pivotal on my project. I had trappers from the Oregon Trappers Association helping me. I didn't know anything about trapping. Do I look like I trap? I do hunt. I needed them to help me. None of them had really ever used cage traps before. I had bought these big custom cage traps that were meant for bobcats. They came from a guy in California. And I was like, I don't know the first thing about trapping foxes, but I know a lot of people. And so I reached out to the local trappers, and they were amazing. None of them trapped foxes, but they had a network of people that knew like what the best baits would be, what the best times would be, you know, like how to set it, how to be sneaky, how to be smarter than a fox. And I was able to use their time as match on this project. And I still talk to them, and I've given presentations to their groups. And my cousin's a trapper. He does a lot of trapping for damage for the state. And I mean, they're great. And you know, diverse needs, wants, desires, and all of that fun stuff, all of our hobbies.
What was the best bait?
The best bait was actually, it was a mixture of, so I would take bacon, and I would chop it into little bitty pieces. My kids loved it. It's like the house smelled amazing. And I put it in a cast iron pan and partially cooked it, and then put in a whole container, a whole square container of lard.
Yeah.
And lard, like cooking lard. Okay. Melted that down, and then a whole thing of honey, like a whole bear full of honey. Mixed that all together, and then ladled it into canning jars, and then it just let it cool and solidify. And then you put 3 rocks. If you really want to know, you guys are gonna get this. 3 rocks. You put one in the way back, and you put a big old fat plop of that bait on the back rock. And then there's a trap pan, so there's like about this much room. Then there's a trap pan, and then you put another rock and a little bit less bait on that rock. And then on the outside of the trap, maybe just smear a little bit on the front or on a rock just outside the front. I tell you what, that was like the bee's knees. It smelled really good. I did not eat it, but it smelled like you could eat it, maybe on toast or something. Not low fat. So that was the best bait. But I mostly utilized a lot of roadkill. So before the roadkill salvage program came about, I was picking up dead deer, asking people to bring me dead deer, and They didn't really seem to care for elk, but they did like the deer carry-on. And then basically anything poultry was, like, they love chicken. I mean, who doesn't like chicken? Well, there are people who don't like chicken, obviously. Yeah, so the Sierra Nevada red fox, its status in Oregon is it's an Oregon conservation strategy species, and I understand a lot of people probably aren't familiar with a conservation strategy species, but they're species that have very little known about them, or they have a really small population size, or their habitats are, basically disappearing. And these are species that we want to focus on, and so they're one of the species that we highlight in conservation projects, which I just talked about. There is a cool website. You can just Google Oregon Conservation Strategy Species, and there's an interactive map, and it'll give you a list of all the trees and plants and the mammals, the invertebrates, the whole shebang on the website. And I don't know that they've linked any projects to this yet. I haven't been on it in a minute, but lots of really cool, great information, and it's split out by ecoregion. So really, really cool stuff. So during this whole thing, while I was just a measly little technician, I went back to school. This was my grad project. I was asked to sit on the SCAT team, so the Sierra Nevada Red Fox Conservation Assessment Team, with quite a few other people. As you can see, there was a lot of people involved in this, but it was mostly Oregon, California. So it was Derek Broman, who's our fur bearer coordinator, and myself. We sat on this and we wrote the conservation strategy for the Sierra Nevada Red Fox. And so this is available to the public if you guys are looking for some, I don't think it's dry reading, I think it's fascinating reading, because there's been a lot of research involved in foxes in Oregon and in California, and then kind of pulls in some of the stuff about the Cascade red fox in Washington, and some great photos. But mostly this is to help guide land and wildlife managers to help best keep these populations healthy. So I had mentioned that the foxes are listed in the state of California. There's been talk when I was doing this conservation strategy about like how would they be able to bring back their populations of Sierra Nevada red fox to California, and translocation is big in the news right now in regard to the gray wolf, right? And Oregon just gave 10 wolves to Colorado to help with their translocation efforts. We haven't had any talks about translocating any foxes. Don't get all worried about that, because the foxes in California, some of those lower elevation foxes actually have made their way up into the mountains on their own. And so now their population isn't genetically pure regardless. They have some of those Sacramento Valley foxes have moved up into the higher elevation areas and have stopped what's called a genetic bottleneck. So they probably don't need anybody's help at this point. They need to just let nature be nature. But some of the stuff that we talked about in this conservation strategy is like, well, why were they not doing well? Well, climate change is one of them, right? So I just said this is a subalpine alpine subspecies. They need that snowpack in the higher elevation areas, and one of the reasons for that, and I would love to do a study on this, would be that without that snowpack, some predators like coyotes, which are very prolific, which are one of the biggest predators of Sierra Nevada red foxes, in all times of the year now are able to get up higher and higher and higher because of that lessened snowpack. Coyotes are fat, they're heavy, like they're not light like these foxes. And so without that snowpack, they're not struggling to get into the high alpine areas anymore, and there's surprising critters that are up in these areas that now don't have that protection of the snowpack any longer. Yes. So that's been an interesting conundrum to deal with as a wildlife manager. So there's still continuing studies going on in California, and I would imagine that will be going on for a while in regard to the foxes, but I talk to them quite often, and it sounds like they're getting more and more foxes on camera at this point. So that's great, like it's looking really good. So previous Sierra Nevada red fox studies, a lot of them were involving what we call indirect methods, and that's using trail cameras and picking up scat and doing those hair snares like I had talked about. And forest carnivore surveys have been going on in the Oregon Cascades since the 1960s. I mean, they did a lot of what we call bio blitzes. I mean, that's like, get on the horses and let's go look for critters. Super fun. but obviously we need to do things a little differently. If we want to learn more about some of these species, we need to utilize technology, and in that respect, we need to get our hands on the critters. So these are some of the studies that were done in California, 1998, Kucera and Philip Perrine, he was doing some work in 2005 and did some of the early captures of foxes using just VHF collars. And so those collars, they put them on the foxes, they have to fly up in fixed wing airplanes, they have to do a triangulation to try and locate the foxes and give their best guess for where they're at. And what they were trying to determine was, for one, habitat use, and two, they wanted to know what the home range size of these critters were, because they kind of had a feeling that maybe they were moving a lot more than what they originally thought. But it was really difficult. One, it's really hard to capture foxes. They're super smart. And then the other thing is, it's difficult to do the VHF telemetry work, especially if you're getting just fixed wing airplanes. You're going around, you're getting like your VHF. It does this where it bounces the signal, bounce off rock walls, and it's hard to be like, is it over there? Is it over there? So it took a lot of effort, and so they weren't able to gather a whole lot of data.
Is that saying that the GPS collars they're using in California aren't working?
They weren't working great. So they're very expensive, and it's a relatively new technology for small mammals. We've been using GPS collars on larger animals for a while, but they can carry a computer. I mean, like, they're big, right? Think moose, elk, deer, like they're larger. The little critters, they had to really, really hone down on the size, because we want to keep, here, like ODFW as an agency, we want to keep those as light as possible, because they gotta wear them.
Radio collars?
Yeah, so we use GPS collars. And so California, they had ordered some GPS collars, and they were coming from Vectronics, which is overseas. And they just weren't having much luck. I mean, it was just, like the collars, they would put them on and then they would fail immediately. Like they weren't taking fixes, or like the batteries were draining really quick. But I mean, they're small. I should have brought one with me, but I mean, imagine, they're this big around, and the case is about this big, and you got to jam all that stuff in there. Well, now we've got, a lot different technology, even back from 2018. I mean, now, you could do everything on a Garmin watch, which mine just, it'll be here Monday, a new one. But anyway, even the watches, which they're very expensive, they do fail. But they did have a lot better success. But I tell you what, it is so frustrating, because it is so hard to capture a fox that once you capture it, golly gee, that thing better work. Like, it's a lot of effort. And in California, because of their status in the state, they require that the state veterinarian be at every single capture. So can you imagine what that is costing? We don't have to do that here in the state. Like I'm trained and certified in chemical immobilization, so I can use all these certified drugs under the license of our veterinarian. But that costs a lot for them. That's time and money, and a lot of people having to go into these efforts. So why should we study them? The previously mentioned status, outside of our state and in our state. We want to increase knowledge of the subspecies. They're cool critters. And we also want to provide wildlife and land managers with the information necessary for managing these foxes. So as the regional habitat biologist, and even before then, I spent a lot of time commenting on projects for the Forest Service. And a big ask right now is all of the firework that's happening. Like we're trying to decrease wildfire severity. Well, we're not, because I don't work for the Forest Service. But there's all these efforts going on. But creating those pristine forests that don't have that understory that look like, an amazing, like Central Park looking area, that is not good for wildlife. It's not good for the elk, it's not good for the deer, and it is certainly not good for mesocarnivores. So taking the information that we glean from these studies, and not just the foxes, but just a variety of critters, and being able to go to the Forest Service and say, hey, we understand, human safety is a concern. Is there any way we can meet in the middle and come up with like the best thing that we can do? Retaining the bitter brush in areas, not burning down the white bark pine. That's really important. White bark pine is a listed species. It's also a conservation strategy species, and the foxes eat it. And then they distribute the seed. So it's like, it's all interconnected. So there's a lot that has gone on from the fox study. We actually, I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with our OCamp, which was our Oregon our connectivity mapping project that we did, we used all these different species to come up with the maps of where are our hot spots in our state where we need wildlife passage. This was one of the species that we used. So what we didn't know, what is their home range? We had no idea what their home range was. What type of habitat are they using? And then what characteristics are seen with rest and den site selection? California hadn't found very many dens, and so there wasn't a whole lot known about what it was that these foxes needed for dens. Reproduction is obviously very important, so we need to know what do we need to be protecting.
What type of habitat?
So this was my study area. It was really big. It was really big. It took me quite a few miles. It was like 200 miles, I think it was, to run my whole trap line. That's what I did. Start of the day, end of the day, every day ran my trap line, and it was a lot of driving, all types of weather. It encompassed the Deschutes National Forest, the Willamette National Forest, and then that western boundary there, that's the PCT.
So wait a minute. You've got to describe how you covered all that ground, because
That's a lot.
these weren't by the side of the road, or maybe they were.
Nope, they weren't. They weren't by the side of the road. Yeah, so that's like getting to the office at dark 30, being to the traps by daylight, sometimes, hiking in with a headlamp on. Yeah, it was a lot. It was amazing. I loved it. It was super fun. It was not fun when we had a snowstorm and you had to dig out the traps. And at that point, I would take the doors off of most traps, and then like the ones that had the most fox sign around them, I would just do those traps so that I wasn't putting myself at risk or putting any foxes at risk. So these are what the traps look like. They're huge. I mean, that's me. That's my torso, and that's a trap. So these came in sets of 4. Like I said, they're custom made by a guy in California who will not make them now anymore. He's like, they're such a pain. But they're great for research. But you can nest them all together and then strap them to a pack frame and, truck in on your cross-country skis or snowshoes or your feet. And this was what we were using. This is a box full of stinky goodness right here. There's like Gusto in there, which is it's a skunk scent, heavy long distance lure, so you can put it up in the tree. Do not get it in your eye; it does not feel good. And they can smell it for like miles away. A lot of critters are attracted to the smell of skunks. I have determined, like elk are really intrigued by it, deer were intrigued by it. People were like, "What is this smell? Why do you stink?"
Do you know why? Do you know why they were attracted to it?
I don't know. I don't know why the ungulates were
weird.
attracted to it, but it is different and weird. Yeah, I do know. I noticed on trail cameras, and we see this a lot, that because we're touching the trail cameras and we have oils and salts on our fingers, that we get a lot of critters that lick the cameras. So we have some great photos of tongues. Just so many photos of tongues. And you're like, what is that? And then finally it'll walk off and like, it was an elk. All right, got it. So as I said, we chemically immobilized. There was only one fox, and it was before I even got my certification that I ended up having to just hold. Because my supervisor had to run out of town for an emergency. Nobody else in the office had their certification, and I called him and I'm like, I will wear welding gloves. I promise I will not get bit. Can I please just put a collar on this thing? Like, it took me forever to catch this fox. And he's like, all right, like, go for it. But we do use drugs on them. So there was basically not a lot out there regarding using these drugs on foxes. Not a lot of people were doing studies on foxes, and the stuff that some of them were using, like, we don't even use those drugs much anymore. So like ketamine was the original one, which is used for a lot of carnivore species. It seemed to work fine, but we weren't going to use that. When I first started this study, we used tilazol on a lot of critters. So that's a two drug combination, toluidamine and zolazepam. And that drug we use for any species really, but mostly carnivore species. That is the drug that we still use mostly on mountain lions and bears. And that's because they synthesize, all critters synthesize drugs differently. I do from you guys, and you guys all vary from each other. But that one works best for carnivores.
Is zolazepam a benzodiazepine?
It is. And nice. And so that one doesn't have a reversal. So when you're using tilazol on a critter, you have to wait there with that animal to make sure it is up on all fours and is running off. And that can take a long time for that drug to burn off through their system. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. You know, how stressed was the animal? Is it cold? Is it hot? You know, how much body fat does that critter have? And during this time, BAM came out. So this is a triple drug combination that we use for pretty much most things with the exception of wolves, cougars, and bears. Although we can use BAM on cougars and bears, there's no reason not to, other than just because Tilazol seems to be something that we use often. BAM is pre-mixed. It has a reversal for the sedative effects of it, and then it also has a second reversal, or a second drug that you use with it that is a pain reliever. And so if you were to get in any sort of trouble with this, if you pricked yourself, you can give yourself the reversal, so there's that. But the other thing is, if that animal seems even remotely in distress, reverse it, send it on its way. Like it's gonna be fine. BAM is awesome. So we were using BAM on this project. Nobody had ever used BAM on foxes before, so we're actually writing a publication about using BAM on mesocarnivores because it is such a safe drug. So yeah, it's great. And so California, they started using BAM on their foxes. Okay, so here is a picture of the collar. We started with using sear track collars, which are also from overseas. And let me tell you, when you need to get a hold of someone and they're in New Zealand and you're in Bend, Oregon, I mean, you're talking to them at the weirdest hours. They were great. They were great collars. You can see I had to retrofit it though because the collar didn't quite go small enough, and so I put some foam padding on there. And I also did that just because, I mean, they're pretty stiff, right? And so you kind of want a little bit of give. You want, like, especially if it was a young fox and it's maybe going to grow a little bit, that eventually that foam will deteriorate over time. So I kind of put that together, and then I put colorful tape on them so that I can tell the difference, because some of these foxes' home ranges overlapped. Of like, oh, I know, that's fox number 9's collar right there. So we started out using those, and the first 3 collars, we programmed them to take fixes every 7 hours because we really wanted to get a year of battery life out of them. And then SearTrack came out with a new collar that had a better battery, and so we programmed those collars to take fixes every 5 hours so that they would last that year, but we could get a little more finite detail on their movement. And they were supposed to drop off automatically. That little protrusion at the top, that's a magnet that's supposed to pop apart and separate. And it worked on most of them. It didn't work on the first one we put it on. Her collar popped off the next day. I did recapture her though. So that was unfortunate. And then number 14, he still has his collar on because it didn't pop off. But other than that, they worked pretty good. And then the data can be downloaded remotely through, it's called an RF signal. And so I had a little handheld device. You guys can imagine this stuff costs a fortune. Like it's all very expensive. Do not drop it. Like just take good care of it. But you had to get pretty close to download the collar data. And I was like, this is ridiculous. There was a couple of times I'm out there and I'm hiking, and it only sends out that RF signal. It was only going out between 7 a.m. and 3 p.m. And that's because of battery life. Like it can't just keep putting out that signal. It's like if you left your Bluetooth on your phone, it's gonna last longer if you turn it off, right? But if you have it on, it's gonna drain the battery. Same concept, but these had like a time that they'd be on or off. And so in order to find these foxes based on where they are, PCT, right? I'd have to call state police, get an appointment for them to fly me up to the Cascades. We'd fly around, we had telemetry on the airplane. We'd find the foxes, so I'd drop a pin on my GPS, fly back to the airport, drive all the way up to the trailhead, literally ran. I was running. I called it running telemetry, and I'm a runner. I love running, so it wasn't that big of a deal, but I'd throw it, the telemetry antenna, I would take it apart and put it in my pack, and the little reader, and I would run. And then I kept seeing people, and they're just like, oh, hey, and I'm like, hi, you know, I will talk to you on the way back down. And then you get there, and you're like, where is this fox? You know, like you're at the end of a moraine tow, and you're just like, I don't know where this fox is, and you know, and you're finding them on your telemetry, and it's like, you know, it's beeping, you're like, it's got to be here somewhere. And then you look at your watch, and now it's 3 o'clock, and you're like, oh, maybe tomorrow. So that was a bummer to have to get so close. So then I ended up going with another company that the last year I did my study, there was this dad and this son, and they realized, hey, you can make a heck of a lot of money if you use cell phone components in these collars and sell them out of your garage. And I was like, I like you. So I bought some of his collars, and he was great. So the other collars, I couldn't really program much other than the times of day on those collars. These other ones, they give you the whole interface. They're like, you can do whatever you want. You can have it so that, like, if the fox moves 10 times, it'll turn on and take a location. Or, you know, like if it's during the resting period, you can have it, you know, monitoring location. And you could change the time on the fly. And it had it was a Bluetooth and RF device that was the downloader. And I could fly and download the data from the sky. It was like such a game changer. I was like, oh, we have it made now. It was awesome. So when I put in for the last year, I wanted to do another year of the study, and my supervisor was like, oh, we're actually not gonna do it. And I was like, I was super bummed out because I was like, okay, we have this nailed down. But I ended up donating it to research, and they used it on a ringtail project. And they are still using it. So technology changes very quickly. So as I had mentioned, one of the biggest things was we wanted to figure out what their home range size was. And Moore in 1947, he used this method for a lot of critters. So basically, a minimum convex polygon is using all the outermost data points from like a critter is here, there, everywhere, and that's the area, right? Well, that's not really their home range. I mean, yeah, it's like the biggest area they could use, but realistically, that's not the area that they're really using. Like sometimes they go on these little forays, but that's not really their home. It's just they went on a quick trip. So then we started, you know, looking at kind of doing like a 95% kernel density estimate, which is using 95% of those locations based on the density and time spent within their home range area, which is a lot better when you're trying to use it for management recommendations. We can kind of just go through this. Okay. Den site characteristics. So how do you find a den? Well, for one thing, you can follow the collars. So I followed fox number 10, who was a male, up to a den, and both the vixen and the tod, so the vixen's the female and the tod raise the kids. And there's typically one other older sibling that will stick around and help raise the kids. Ingenious, I mean, come on, super smart. So from those collared foxes, I was able to find, mark, and then put cameras on dens and then document reproduction. So that's one way to find a den. Another way is, you know, just to extrapolate from general red fox knowledge. Here's a hole. It looks fox shaped, pretty round, pretty big. It's not a badger hole, they're kind of football shaped. Are there fox tracks around it? And there's, you know, scat. And so I did a lot of that. I did a lot of, you know, while I'm out running around, you know, like taking a look at those moraine toes and like the big earthen rock piles. Like we have such a unique area here with all the basalt and andesite lava flows that they love to use those. And they really, really like it if it was occupied by marmots. And then they go in and eat all the marmots, and then they raise their kids in that same den. This is all from like just boots on the ground work. Like this is not internet research. This is not reading research papers. This is a biologist on the ground, literally watching things happen. So that's one of the ways you can find, you know, dens. This is a den. So that first picture that we had up on the screen with the incorrect date on it was at this area, and this is like up in the Tumalo Mountain area. I mean, this doesn't look like a fox den to me. Like it just didn't upon first glance. But I had followed that, and it was collar data point after collar data point. Obviously, he's going up there for a reason. So I'm like, all right, I guess I'll set a camera. And then in all this little dirt in here were teeny tiny little fox tracks and lots of little poops. And I was like, well, that's pretty indicative. And so I put a camera there and I left it because I didn't want to go up there and disturb it if indeed it was a natal den. So I left it for months. And I finally went up there, I think it was like September by that point, because by September they should be leaving the dens. They should have left the dens and trying to, you know, go off on their own. I pulled that camera. It had so many photos on it, but it did indeed have 3 kids on that camera. So that was pretty cool.
Where about on there would you have had the camera to get the pictures you wanted?
So some of these like white bark pine trees on the periphery.
Back further.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was kind of back over this way. Yeah, and they were just out running around. I mean, as kids do, as soon as the parents leave or the sibling leaves, oh my goodness, they are out of the den, they're running around, it's just, kids. Yeah, so I'll just kind of go over some of our years. I used to have a ton of photos of like all the foxes that I've captured, but I would be talking to you guys till Sunday if I had all the photos. So
How many have you captured?
we captured 17 individuals, which is quite a few, but that's upper and lower elevation areas. But 14 of those foxes were Sierra Nevada red foxes.
What length of time did it take you to capture?
We started in 2016, but we didn't capture our first fox until 2017, which is this one right here. And then we trapped until fall of 2020. And then I left to go on a bighorn sheep project. So 20, and I have to look at the numbers here. I think I have them there. We captured 2 foxes in 2017, number 1 and number 2. And then the following year, we captured, oh gosh, I think it was, 5 new foxes and 2 recaptures. We were super successful that year. And one of the things that we discovered was it's actually not easier to catch foxes in the winter. We thought, based off of literature and talking to, trappers, that critters would be easier to catch in the winter because their prey resources would be less, right? That's not the case for the foxes at all. It's actually easier to catch them during the denning period when their caloric requirements become exponentially higher. When they've got kits in the den, the foxes are more willing to take those risks, and that's because there are 3 adults effectively hunting for the entire family unit. So it was actually easier for us to just focus those efforts on that denning period, which is about May until August. And we were indeed capturing lactating females. We never had any issues with capturing lactating females. I was up there first thing in the morning, and we would do the measurements, send the female on her way, she'd immediately go back to the den, and we didn't have a single capture myopathy this entire project. And then 2018 is when I decided that we needed to add in some of those lower elevation foxes because we were really focused up high in the mountains. And I started picking up some scat and samples from the lower elevation areas, and that's when we discovered that they were Rocky Mountain red foxes. And I was like, I think we're gonna need some information. We're gonna need to know, like, in comparison of the home range size for the lower elevation foxes, what are we looking at for the higher elevation foxes? And we wanted to know morphometrics, like, are they bigger? And indeed they are. So the Rocky Mountain red foxes are bigger, and their tails are longer, interestingly. So their Vulpes macrora is their scientific name, and macrora comes from macros, which is Greek for long, and they do indeed have a much longer tail than any red fox subspecies. So that was kind of neat to get hands on some lower elevation foxes. And then this was the last year of our study. That's my coworker Landon. I just got off a river trip, a bighorn sheep trip with him last week, actually. But we captured, I think it was 2 more foxes that last year. And then I squeaked 1 more in before I left for Baker City, just because I had an extra collar hanging around. So I caught another one. That's the last fox I caught right there. Yeah, a little female. Very young. That is a oxygen mask, in case anybody's worried about how amazing that we took care of these foxes. I mean, I custom ordered these tiny little oxygen masks for the foxes. So what did we learn? We definitely learned a lot of stuff. So these foxes have huge home ranges. They're upwards of about 90 square miles, which is very comparable to a red wolf. That's a big home range for an animal that's smaller than my cat. So what does that mean? I mean, that means we need to be protecting large swaths of habitat, right? These are family groups. They can be protective of their home ranges. A lot of the foxes in the Oregon Cascades, they would overlap a little bit, but for the most part, they kind of had their own areas that they would stick into. And so if you think about how many foxes that there are up there, so we knew of these 13 foxes, and there's a lot more out there that aren't collared, the amount of space required and how little space there is of habitat that looks like that. And that's just here in the Central Oregon Cascades. That's not counting Mount Hood, that's not counting down south, you know, like south of Crescent to the Klamath Mountains or anything like that. This is kind of what I talked about, you know, we discovered it is much easier to capture foxes during the denning period. Winter was not only a lot of work, it was effectively useless. It was great for cross-country skiing and for, you know, tooling around on snowshoes. And then these are the home ranges. These are the little polygons that we created for the individuals that were captured. So you can see I captured foxes all the way from the north through the middle down south. You know, 17 total individuals, 13 were identified as Sierra Nevada red foxes. We've had some genetics since that we've turned in that came back as Sierra Nevada red fox. 5,800 trap nights and over 7,000 collar data points. So we got a lot of data off of this study. This is just kind of a cool map showing elevation. Yeah, they like that high elevation area for sure, indeed.
What's their family social structure? Was it more of a nuclear family?
So they are, like I had mentioned, there's the Todd and the Vixen, and they are monogamous for the most part. Not to say that if a mate wasn't killed that they wouldn't go back to it. During the denning season, which we effectively say starts, you know, at the end of December, that's when they're gonna, you know, the Vixens at the beginning of the year are gonna start coming into estrus, but they're gonna breed, and the Todd and Vixen at that point are gonna start staying together. And then once she has her kits in, it's usually like late May to early June, so they actually have a later denning season, like when they're actually giving birth, than like a normal red fox would. Then you'll see that sibling from the previous year that will be kind of hanging around helping them hunt, and so the Todd and the Vixen will be, you know, kind of hanging around, and maybe the sibling will go out and hunt. And the Vixen will stay in the den for the most part while she's nursing. And then once her kits start eating some of that solid food, she'll kind of go out. And then by September, the kits will have been, they're almost full grown at that point. They'll kind of, you know, just go off on their own. One of them will stay back and kind of hang around mom for a little bit. And that's usually the one that's going to end up helping with the kids the next year. The Todd, they just leave, you know, for a couple months, and they go on, you know, a hunting trip or something. And then it starts all over again. It varies. During our study, we had almost 100% mortality, mostly due to vehicle strikes, and we had 2 that were killed by bobcats. But yet almost all of them were lost due to vehicles. So the lifespan, I mean, can be great. That fox number 1, which also I recaptured and ended up becoming fox number 11 until we got genetics back to find out it was the same fox. And actually I knew because she had a broken canine. She was probably pretty old. You would have to pull a tooth in order to know the specific age, and we didn't obviously want to do that on them. I guess I could have done it with the dead ones, but that costs money. I mean, she was probably 10. But that fox number 14 that's up at Elk Lake, he was already an adult when I captured him, and I captured him in 2017, and he's still up there alive.
So, but when you say 100% mortality,
100% death.
But those didn't all die. I mean, they lived different ages, right?
They did. Yeah, they all lived different ages. I mean, we lost everything from, you know, young of the year to that
the
one
older
that was
ones.
very old. Yeah.
And the older ones might have been hit by a car too.
Yeah, one of the older ones that was from the northern portion of my study area, she was killed by a bobcat. And I know because I found her carcass and I did the necropsy, and she had 2 puncture wounds in her head that were indicative of a bobcat. And then that last one I captured actually was also killed by a bobcat, and that was a young one. That was a young of the year.
Oh.
Yeah, but
Did it heal or?
they do, yeah. Yeah, and actually one of the other predators that go after them, especially when they have kits in the den, is a mountain lion. And I have quite a few pictures of a mountain lion following a vixen as she moved her kits from den to den.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, and the only reason why I knew where she moved them was because I had the collar on her and could find the dens again and was just putting cameras out.
And coyotes, do they go after them too?
Yeah.
But they're not up that high, are they?
They are, yeah. Yep. So we looked at the cover selection, so we used those same polygons that I just showed you on that other map. to extract the habitat that's found within those areas. And so we were looking for the cover that was selected for, so the cover that they were using more so than the cover that they were selecting against. And it was not a surprise, you know, alpine and subalpine environments is what they, you know, really lean toward, and like that, the hemlock dominated forests, and then of course those meadow areas are really important to them. And a surprising amount of time spent in that volcanic rock, which, I mean, I guess it's not super surprising because they obviously done in it, but they were, I mean, you see them hunting in it. I did a little TV blip once, and we were watching them like come across, well, we couldn't see them yet, but I was following them with the radio telemetry, and they used a culvert, went under the road and popped out, and I was like, well, you better have the camera ready because this thing's about to run right in front of us, and sure enough, it did. We were standing on top of a lava flow. And then, you know, they really avoid those pine forests, and then like any of that Doug fir dominated. It's not the right type of habitat for them. It's not quite in the high enough elevation areas, and it's also not offering up the same resources as, say, like white-horn pine would. So this is just an example in case you didn't know what like kind of the subalpine alpine habitats look like. This is up off of D right, like the trails up to the Obsidian Trailhead up in that area. Just another shot. And then this is just showing some of the densite characteristics. So this is a really, really pretty vixen that she was almost like a red cross. Like she was really cool. But she had 2 little cross kits, and that was a den that she had used and 2 other vixens had used years prior. So this was a den, it's, you know, it's, there it is, you know, like they use them year after year. This is another example that's at, you know, just the end of a moraine. And then, so yeah, so just showing, you know, like the vehicle strikes. We had 1 fox that showed up dead on the southern end of my boundary, that it was likely poisoned by rat poison. I mean, it was likely killed by rat poison. The fox was almost completely gelatinous. Yeah. So we will be. This goes to your earlier question about the shedding. So this is fox number 14. You remember that beautiful fox toward the beginning with his beautiful coat? They're ugly in the summer. I mean, he's still adorable, but yeah, just like people will call and they're like, I saw the mangiest fox, and like it's just shedding its coat because they're hot, like, right? Like they just have so much hair. There's me working hard. And then I think I have another one just showing you kind of some of the other foxes just in the area. These ones, I get great photos from people that send me pictures, and this isn't even my project anymore. I'm not the conservation biologist. We have a conservation bio. That's at Soda Creek. That's a Forest Service guy took that photo. He's crossing a bridge. Yeah, and we've had, I think I've picked up 5 mortalities from that bridge. I would love to see some sort of wildlife passage in this area, or at the very least a flashing sign with a fox on it. I don't know, like what is it gonna take? And that's one of the bachelor foxes begging for hamburgers. And then just more of showing like just the habitat that they are using, and yeah, I mean they're just pretty cool. So, you know, our research has applications to both Oregon and California. We will be submitting this paper to the Wildlife Society Bulletin along with a resource selection paper. We're actually also going to do a paper regarding those chemical mobilization drugs. You know, just some other stuff that people can use as they're doing other fox studies, since there's not a whole lot out there. And then my big thing was I wanted to fill in those knowledge gaps. And if it wasn't going to be me, I guess that's fine. But our conservation bio, Callie, she put in for some funding and was able to get money to Washington State University, and they hired a grad student to come down. And so I trained her, and she went out and she set all these game cameras in wilderness areas. Like we had to get all these permits, and we did a big training on training up just citizen scientists. We needed bodies with feet, like to go out there and set cameras. And arms, you know, not just bodies and feet. And she was fantastic. She was great. She worked really hard, and they worked from June until we just picked up the last cameras last month. And just starting to fill in those areas. And so while they were setting cameras, they were picking up scat, And then I went through all that scat and kind of, got rid of the stuff that I was like, that's probably not a fox. And then we, packaged it all up. And I just got a quote from UC Davis, and it's like a ridiculous amount of money. I want to say it was like $120 per sample, and we have a lot of samples. Not really sure what we're doing about that yet, but I do have some money for it. We have had a lot of project partners. So this project was paid for mostly off of Pittman-Robertson dollars, and that's an excise tax on firearms, ammunition, and some archery tackle, which is like not a typical project for something that comes from hunter dollars. But I can tell you, like, the Oregon Hunters Association loved this project. They came out with me. A lot of them are really good friends of mine. They've, taught my kids how to chucker hunt and all sorts of great stuff. So it was a great use of the Pittman-Robertson dollars, and I honestly thought there might be some pushback from the hunting community, but they were like, no, that's awesome. Like, that's great. We see these. And then they were sending me photos of foxes that they've seen while they were out in hunting season. And then Oregon Zoo, they threw in some money for some of those traps, and then like the wildlife control supplies, they donated some stuff. And then the big overarching one is the Wildlife Ecology Institute, and he does a lot of work. He's out of Helena, Montana, but he used to work for the state. And he, it's just a lot of, historic knowledge of fur bearers here in Oregon. So the High Desert Museum, also huge shout out to them, because they do a lot of public outreach. They had volunteers for my project that were putting out trail cameras and coming out with me to check traps. And they still, they still talk about the foxes at the museum. And, the Forest Service, of course. And my kiddo gave me that little stuffed fox, and it went everywhere.
And they have one there. Is that yours?
At the museum? The stuffed fox or a real fox?
No, the real one.
Oh, yeah. So they have
He's
gray
one of-
foxes there at the museum. They don't have a red fox at the museum,
He's
but
not one of yours.
no. They have two gray foxes actually, and the newer one, whose name I can't remember what it is. Someone had named it, but gray foxes, interesting fact, are the only foxes that can climb. Their claws are
Really?
kind of like a cat, and she just like climbs. I have pictures of her climbing all over me. Yeah, and gray foxes have a black dorsal stripe that runs down their back and a black tip on their tail.
Black question.
Where they live?
Yeah.
Oh my God. How curious are they about you, about humans?
They're pretty curious. Yeah, so that is a problem. That is a problem. That's why they get run over so often. Is that just like any other critter that, that's kind of like that, they can become very easily habituated. It is an issue in Grand Teton National Park. Like they have to euthanize foxes often for people feeding them and getting bit, because they can carry rabies, and the only way to test for rabies is if you kill the animal. So I tell people this at Bachelor, don't feed the foxes. If it bites you, we have to shoot it. Like, don't do that. But yeah, they are very, very curious, but they are still, obviously afraid of people, and some of them are more curious than others, and yeah, but the habituation is a real problem. I feel like somebody else had something.
Can I ask a coyote question?
Yeah.
Do coyotes eat juniper berries?
Oh, that is a great question. I don't see why they wouldn't eat juniper berries.
Well, I noticed in the winter time when I'm walking, I found an awful lot of it in the scat, and there's not enough raccoons to do all that, so it's gotta be coyotes.
Yeah. I mean, it probably is. I feel like there's not a lot that coyotes don't eat, really. And you'll see the same thing you'll see coyote scat full of grass, and that's just like with dogs when their stomachs are upset. And I would imagine that juniper berries might have the same reaction, either for calming the stomach or maybe even for the reason why we distill gin out of it. Because birds do the same thing.
You mentioned the gray fox at the High Desert Museum. Besides these two subspecies of red fox, how many different types of foxes live in Oregon?
We also have the kit fox, and it's down in Southeast Oregon. And actually, Tim Hiller, the guy from the Wildlife Ecology Institute, is doing a study on them down in the southeast.
Southeast Oregon.
Oh, southeast.
They're little, right?
Yeah, they're smaller.
So, are you gonna do a talk about your Rocky Mountain sheep? picture?
I should. I tell you what, that was the most amazing trip of my life. I caught my first salmon, and it was enormous. I should have put a picture on here. It was like this big. I'm not even kidding you. It was huge. I was so excited. It took me, I don't even know, 30 minutes to reel the darn thing in. Thought my arms were gonna fall off. But he had it was a U tag. He had one of the U tags, and we always told each other, if we ever drew a sheep tag, we'd go together. And it was
So it
great.
was on the Snake River?
It was on the Deschutes. Yeah, on the Deschutes. So we caught salmon, we caught steelhead. He got his U day 3 after we stalked on it with his bow the first 2 days. Like we got within 5 yards the first day, 30 yards the second day. We had a stalk on like this grass hillside, and we're just like army crawling. I mean, it was bananas. But yeah, it was a great trip. We went after chukar, and I'm a big hunter. I love to hunt. I love to feed my family. I don't do a lot of meat shopping at the grocery store. In fact, I had gotten a pheasant recently, and that's what's for dinner tonight. Yeah, that bighorn sheep, that trip was pretty awesome.
Okay, any last questions? Okay, all right, so you can. It's really fun to have a speaker who likes her job. And love it. She's from the government, she's here to help you.
Yeah.
All right.
I threw her off because I wasn't in my uniform. I was like, I gotta wear the fox dress
That's
and the
funny.
fox earrings.
She did, yeah, she's there, and she's like, I'm Jamie. I'm like, where's your dude? I didn't say it, but you saw me do that.
Where is your uniform?
Yeah. So she said something about her foxes, which was very cute.
The dress is best.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just a reminder that we have our books for sale. If you don't have your weed book, plant book, or bird book, and we will take cash and credit cards. And otherwise, you are adjourned. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.